Hey, this is a Jose Galison on No Way Jose on the Liberty Movement YouTube channel. My guest today is John Bush. He's the creator of the Freedom Cells. He's the purveyor of the Live Free Now podcast, owner of Brave Botanicals. He's also done plenty of other stuff. He's really, if anything, he was Konkin's dream, with his entrepreneurial spirit, with all the stuff he's got going on. John, you want to tell us about the Freedom Cells? That's going to be the main topic today that I brought you on for, if you want to go ahead and get into that.
Sure. Well, Freedom Cells are essentially a mutual aid group where people work together to support one another, to help one another, to aid one another. They also work together for mutual defense and achieving common goals. It's decentralized, peer-to-peer, been around since 2014. And since then, the network has grown to over 6,000 people now. It was just 5,000 people. Now it's 6,000. Our goal is to have 10,000 by the end of the year. But there's a very unique structure of the Freedom Cell network that allows for scaling, growth in numbers and participants, while the network and the social organization remains entirely horizontal. So it'll never grow vertically and add bureaucracy or leaders, or there's natural leaders that are kind of inspiring people, but there's no governance. It's all just decentralized and peer-to-peer. And so it all starts with the inner cadre group, which is approximately 8 people that work together, come up with common goals. We choose the number 8 because there's been research that shows 8 people is the optimal number for creativity and getting things done. And then you work with your inner cadre group, you set goals, and then you link up with other inner cadre groups to form what we call a middle cadre, which is approximately 64 people. Doesn't have to be exactly 8, by the way. It could be 7, 9, whatever. It's just an open source idea, but that's what's encouraged. And that middle cadre group of around 64, 8 groups of approximately 8, ideally is over a city or a smaller area so people can get together in person. They can work on gardens together. They can defend one another, support one another. And then the middle cadres link up with other middle cadres in other parts of the state or other parts of the city. This forms what we call a meta cadre group. So like I said, there's over 6,000 participants. Those are people that are registered on the site, freedomcells.org, where you can go register, sign up. There's a member map where you can put your address in, or an address at the park down the road or the coffee shop around the corner. And then you can find people in your area. And a good number of the 6,000 people are beginning to organize in this structure. And so we've really only begun to scratch the surface of capabilities and potential that this number of agorists and free people working together, what we can accomplish.
Yeah, that's awesome. It seems like every time I check in, I watch your podcast fairly regularly. It seems like every time I check in, you've got a huge boost in numbers, and it's awesome. I feel great about that. One thing I want to go into, because a lot of people who follow on this may know that this is kind of something that sprung out from the Liberty Movement, which is a Facebook group.
I'm listening. Sorry.
You're good. It sprung out from a Facebook group, and the idea was that we wanted to kind of create like a social, non-political movement, and we wanted to do that in whatever way we can. One of the ways, it's kind of like a multifaceted thing, and one facet of this was that we set up chapters. And then that was one of the first things that came up. I actually can't even remember. And I know, I feel like I know where you're at. I doubt you're you're into IP too much. You're probably not one of the ones that care too much about that. But I honestly can't even remember if I had heard about you before or after, because I know you showed up on the Tom Woods channel around that time. And a lot of people immediately made comparisons between our chapters and that, because we were trying to do it's not a political thing, which is kind of almost, whatever you want it to be was the idea. And that's kind of what everybody went to immediately. And that was kind of one thing I wanted to go into, is because a lot of people see that as being like this adversarial thing. And I would think, I'm not in your head, but I feel like I have a pretty good idea of how you think, generally speaking. And I would think you would kind of agree with me that it's very much like in a free market sense, it's actually not necessarily a bad thing. Because, the more people you bring, it's kind of the idea of like how Edward Bernays' propaganda, like one of the concepts he went into is like say, for example, soda. A good example would be like soda, like Pepsi and Coke. They don't really ever do ads like screw Coke or screw Pepsi or Pepsi's better than Coke or vice versa. It's usually more they push the concept of soda in general, and they're trying to get that going. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. I just didn't know if you had thoughts on the matter. I guess I'm kind of assuming how you'd think, but I've been listening to you for a while, so I think I kind of have a general idea of how you would think as well. So yeah, I don't know if you have any input on that.
Sure. Well, I've been involved in liberty and truth movements since 2002. And in that time, I've come to realize that there's a good number of us. So a lot of people that think in that adversarial competition mindset have a scarcity mindset, thinking that if somebody joins liberty movement, then they won't be exposed or can't join freedom cells, or there's only one, you can only be involved in one organization if you're an activist. I believe there's some overlap, folks that are involved in the liberty movement groups and then folks that are in freedom cells and vice versa. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's more so cooperation than competition. And there's so many voluntarists and anarchists and agorists and libertarians that there's plenty of organizations, and there's no need to fret over a group competing with another group or whatever. I think people that focus on that kind of stuff have more of a scarcity mindset rather than an abundance mindset. And at the end of the day, we're all unique individuals. So for some people, the liberty movement may appeal to them, or they may have friends or community that are already involved. Some people may think the freedom cell thing is like a little extreme or whatever when we talk about opting out and getting private security forces to protect us from the state. So it's all unique needs and preferences for individuals. So no, the thought never crossed my mind of competition or adversarialism.
Yeah, I mean, cross mind either, but like, because I mean, I've been studying this stuff for a while, and like even from an economic sense, like I brought up, it's just that doesn't really make sense. Like in the sense like monopolies, like they don't generally happen in a true free market, and like what ends up happening is other versions spring up of similar concepts, and if anything, they kind of help thrive each other. It's kind of the whole rising tide raises all ships kind of deal. So like even from an economic sense, just overthinking it just never made sense to me. I don't know. I think a lot of people that have that concept in their head of it's adversarial just haven't really thought about it deeply enough in that sense. And also I think there's a good chance that I hope for both of our things that they go far. Like I mean, every time I hear about your numbers going up, it kind of, it's the whole concept of the white pill. I mean, I feel great when I hear about like that you're up to 6,000 or whatever, and I hope both of our concepts thrive, in general. Because I'm not getting any money out of this or anything. I mean, if it does in the future, cool, whatever. But, I hope both thrive. And the point I'm getting at is, God, I had a brain fart. But yeah, I hope both of them thrive. And I also think that naturally what would most likely happen is they probably wouldn't occupy the exact same space in a market. They would most likely to some extent kind of take on different forms, because I actually think there are some distinctions, because I feel like ours would lend itself more to being like a social thing. Whereas, don't get me wrong, I kind of would like it to be super serious, because I'm very much on board with you. I consider myself an agorist as well, and I think very much in the same way. And I'm all about, grouping up in personal defense and breaking off. But I see something, especially something that's more based on like social networks, being more of a social thing. And I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's fine. If social groups, I think that's a good way to advance liberty through the culture. But I think there's also a spot for like, hey, find the remnant within the remnant. You have people in the liberty movement groups, and I always advocate for you guys. Go, hey, go check out the freedom cells. Go check out the freedom cells, because I get the vibe that you guys are a little bit more serious in that sense. Not to say being social things aren't serious, but they occupy a different space in the market, if that makes sense. Yeah. I threw a lot at you there, but
I think a lot of people tend to overthink things, and what's really important is action. So people are like, well, there's already the liberty movement and there's already freedom cells. I wanted to do something, but it's just people just worrying too much, when in reality, we need more doers and action and people getting serious and making stuff happen and bringing people together. It's really important.
Yeah, that's what I'm all about. And also this kind of segues into my next point. With Facebook the way it is, I mean, we've been trying from the beginning to kind of branch off from Facebook and do our own thing, but it's kind of like that's where the people are, and I mean, anyone who has any sort of like, for example, I have another business on the side, and I use Facebook a lot for marketing. That's just where the people are, like really I'm at the point where I would be off Facebook completely if it wasn't for, that aspect of that's where the masses are at, And so we kind of set up there, and we're trying to sprint off, but you guys over the freedom cells don't have that issue because you have your own website. I mean, I'm not much of a tech guy, so I don't really know how impervious you guys are to the technocracy. So I don't know if you want to go into that at all, or because I know you could go on forever for the technocracy stuff.
Yeah, we do have our own website, freedomcells.org, and there is a built-in social network plugin. So the beauty of that is that there's no censorship and it's autonomous from big tech, which is problematic. I've never had a problem leveraging and using Facebook in order to reach people. I've had my share of 7-day and 30-day bans, in large part for promoting Kratom, which isn't even illegal. I mean, it's illegal in 6 states, but I think it's important that we adopt like a dual strategy. So you mentioned the Remnant. The Remnant are those people that understand key principles and that have the character to live those principles. And they're in an extreme minority in a given population. Also in the Bible, in the biblical sense, the Remnant is the folks that will come and rebuild society when it all comes crashing down. And then you have the masses, which just go along to get along. And many of them aren't even capable of understanding the principles of liberty, for example, in our case, in the liberty movement, let alone applying them or desiring to live by them. So I think it's important to find the Remnant and then to bring the Remnant to other channels, and most importantly, meeting in person, old school method, which is something the technocracy and the Great Reset wants to take away. Or using Float, for example. Float.app is a non-statist social media platform. That's probably the best one. There's also minds.com and MeWe, but Float.app is made by voluntarists for voluntarists, so that's cool. But it's also important to still have a presence on Facebook in order to leverage the platform. Like you said, it's where most everyone is at. And so as long as you don't mind the privacy breach of putting all your information and sharing all sorts of stuff there, I actually been getting some pretty good advertisements for the past 6 months or so. I'm way into entrepreneurship and I get all sorts of ads that are useful. So I think there is some value in being served up ads that are related to what you're interested in, as opposed to selling you stuff that you don't care for or whatever, especially as an entrepreneur that has access to those platforms. Although my Facebook advertising account got shut down because of Kratom. But it's good to go in and engage the masses and pick off people from the fringes, because like the bulk of people in this world, in the United States, they aren't going to join our forces. They don't really care too much for the philosophy of liberty. They just want to work, earn a living, come home, have a beer, play with their kids, watch the game, and then repeat and go on. They don't have aspirations to create a genuinely free society. So they're kind of out of the game, right? But there's people on the fringes of the left and the right that can kind of be picked off and made to follow our lead or come follow our path. And I'm hoping as the Great Reset and technocracy grows, which we can talk about, there's going to be alternatives, free private cities, eco-villages, intentional communities, special economic zones. And my hope is that we can, as free people that are innovators and actually doing stuff, we can create these alternative ways of living and do it in a sexy way. We're free, we're prosperous. We also have access to new technology. We're doing eco stuff too, like the Illuminati and the New World Order wants to do all this eco sustainability stuff. Really, it's like eco-fascism. And so hopefully people see like, oh, wow, look at those folks that are living outside the smart cities. They all seem really happy and free and prosperous. Maybe we should go join them, or maybe we should look into what they're doing, because I don't like being tracked and traced and surveilled and controlled with every aspect of my life. So I think it's important that we find the Remnant. And I do believe that there's enough people that are liberty leaning, libertarian, agorist, voluntarists, that if we simply stop engaging the system and start organizing ourselves for mutual aid, mutual defense, working together on common goals, then I think we can opt out and find freedom in our lifetimes, or at least in our children's. But there's still value in bringing more people into the fray. There's not value in trying to shift the masses entirely to vote for our positions or whatever. I think that's a losing strategy. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I like to think, the way I see it in my head is I kind of see what we're doing is more like the liberty movement is looking for the remnant, and you guys are, and your thing is more like the remnant within the remnant, because and that's honestly where the real stuff will be at. But I mean, we try to be as as a mass appeal as possible but there is some sort of exclusionary attitude to it, to where it's like, if you're not really liberty minded. I mean, the two questions we have to join our group is, what is taxation? And then also is, are you okay with this being a non-political spot? And that's honestly, that's the one we probably have the most trouble with, because we also, not only is it non-political, like we also will try to prevent like anti-political stuff, which, I mean, I have no problem admitting I'm a non-voting anarchist and I'm kind of against that, but I do think there is some aspects to where a lot of people like that tend to scare off some of the folk with our, you're a statist or whatever. And I think sometimes, like, kind of in my head, I mean, this is just me talking as myself, not the whole group, because we have other admins, but I kind of like what we're doing is like a kind of almost a show, like, hey, we can show you a better way, without having to like exclude you and like, call you names and stuff like that. Like, hey, here's an example of ways we can advance liberty, and you can do both. And I know that's the one thing you bring into a lot. I think that's a pitfall a lot of like agorists and like anarchists fall into, is, shitting on the ones who are still engaged with the system. And yeah.
I had a phase like that myself, where I was kind of a arrogant jerk, and like I discovered agorism and anarchism, and the people that are still engaged in politics are like ignorant statists and sheep or whatever. And then I realized I was just being a total asshole and turning people off. And at the end of the day, everyone, like I was saying before, everyone has their own interests. Maybe people feel good or excited about the election day and lobbying and voting and stuff, and whatever floats their boat. And like you pointed out, I do often say, like, we can do all different strategies. The enemies of liberty are coming at us from all different angles, death by 1,000 cuts. We can return that same strategy. I will say, however, if people only engage in political activism without building the agora and the alternative, then I believe that they're doing themselves a disservice, because if it's only politics, then we're trapped inside the system, inside the cyclical paradigm of repeating the same Lord Acton quote, that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And then on another note, like, the Libertarian Party is just really inept. It's not a good vehicle for liberty. Maybe it started off with on the right track, which was just to wake people up to liberty and to educate people about liberty. And some of the earlier principles were a little more radical. Even Jojo Jorgensen, who I think was Harry Brown's running mate at one point. Harry Brown was a badass. She was good on message, but Libertarian Party is just kind of dull. And like, somebody posted, I'm in this Texas Libertarians group. It's the Texas Libertarian Party folks. And they're like, you think the NRA would work with us next year? And I was just posted real quick, like, no, the Libertarian Party is not relevant. Why would they even want to work? The thing that you need to focus on is, how do we gain relevance? How do we gain leverage? And you know what I think a lot of it is people feel important when they run for office, or I'm a candidate for U.S. Congress, or I got elected as a chair to the Libertarian National Convention. And I think it's kind of like an ego thing. And then the damn Libertarian Party has this problem that a lot of organizations have, which I hope to avoid with the Freedom Cell Network, and you guys take steps to avoid with Liberty Movement, is like, it becomes bureaucratic, and then there becomes this value that people have in simply maintaining the institution. So when you ask Libertarian Party folks, like, well, what victories have you guys had? What have y'all done for me, for my freedom? And they're like, well, we maintained ballot access, and we ran 50 candidates, and we got like 3% of the vote, something like that. It's like, that doesn't do anything to bring about more freedom for me and my kids and for the future generations. And a lot of it just comes to preserving the institution. And then so rather than the Libertarian Party being a means to an end, the means is like political activism, waking people up, education, getting on the platform, getting on a local debate stage. And then the end is a free society. The Libertarian Party becomes an end in itself. Now our goal is no longer to leverage the Libertarian Party to create more freedom. Our goal is to maintain the Libertarian Party and to grow the Libertarian Party. So that's my 2 cents on the Libertarian Party. I'm not a big fan, but then again, if people are active and doing stuff, it's better than doing nothing. But it's not really doing much for liberty.
I generally look at it as like a part of the journey kind of deal. And it seemed like most people typically go that way in your journey. I know you've even brought up yourself before, how you went that route before as well. You know, you went down the Libertarian Party thing. And I think a lot of that too you kind of want to do a little bit. I think that might have something to do with how organizational structures are set up. Because like you set up how yours kind of is like a bottom up / lateral type organization, whereas our goal is we did kind of wanted to utilize how Facebook and like the social media networks have large groups of people, and we did try to set up a top down, but the idea was top down, and as we go down we decentralize. So the idea was that we essentially lose the reins of power, and it is kind of hard because it is kind of like, if luckily we've kept a small group of people there, because I mean you could end up with some like bureaucratic nonsense there as well, even not involving the state. But I mean, and I think there's probably perks to every organizational structure, but I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a whole other separate conversation. I just thought I liked how yours kind of builds from a bottom up type thing, and then also works lateral as time goes on. I mean, we didn't really have that kind of setup, so I mean, just different strokes, you know. But yeah, I think probably go ahead and get into some of the questions. I got a couple questions from the audience that we put out. This is from a dude on MeWe we were talking about earlier, because I put out feelers in multiple places. He says, do you have any Freedom Cell success stories that you're particularly proud of? And then what makes them special? And then there's more questions to that. It's a whole list of questions. Okay.
Yeah, there's one group in Oklahoma. Just real quick to paint the picture again, there's 6,000 people that are registered on the website, but not all 6,000 of them by any stretch are organized with other people, doing meetups, working together, going to the shooting range together, so on and so forth. I don't know the exact number. Usually once a week or once every 2 weeks, someone will reach out and be like, hey, we got our group together in Atlanta or here or there, which is always exciting to hear. So it's still in large part in the infancy, and I expect that we'll see a lot of growth. I got back involved maybe like 6 months ago or so, really along with the COVID stuff. And I began to have a little bit more freedom with my time because I finally got a stronger financial footing with my business. But and one of the things that I really aim to do is get people organized and activated, building out this social structure, this organization, so we can all work together. But I always like to brag on Lisa Bowman in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I see her a lot too.
Yeah, she's great. They have a couple intercadre groups there in Tulsa, and we just participated in this Voluntarious Festival. Is one of these like events a la Jackalope Freedom Festival. And there's probably like 60 people or so that participated, that came. And it was cool because there was a couple Tulsa Freedom Cells, and then they linked up and met folks from West Arkansas and Southeast Missouri. And so now there's this regional thing going on there, which is really cool. But Lisa does a monthly Voluntarious meetup, which kind of serves as a recruiting mechanism for people to get involved with the Freedom Cell organization. And they recently did a permablitz type activity where they got her intercadre group together, which I think probably has like 6 people, and they built a nice big garden in her backyard. And she pointed out that it's something that would have taken maybe 2 or 3 days worth of work if she did it by herself. But with the group, they managed to do it in 2 to 3 hours. And then they had dinner afterwards and stuff. So, building gardens and growing your own food is a really low-hanging fruit activity that's no risk. It's not illegal. It's not some big, crazy counter-economic activity, but it's something that's really key and very important for people to do in the Freedom Cell Network and people that are seeking more freedom. So that's something that I would encourage people to do. And then, of course, the beauty of having strength in numbers, which is what Freedom Cell is all about, is it makes you more effective, and more hands makes for lighter work. So I think that's a great story to share.
Not to go on too much of a tangent, but a little bit of a pro tip for anyone listening who hears that and thinks about gardening. Gardening is a great thing to do, and I think it will be good, especially if there is a collapse. But I think a lot of people have this idea that they'll start gardening when there is a collapse. I was one of them because I started at the beginning of all the COVID stuff, and I started a garden. And it didn't do too well, but so I mean, it's one of those things I think you got to start sooner than later, because it's kind of the idea. Yeah, it's not something you're just going to pick up. You need to develop those skills.
Especially going from seed to fruit, especially if you have a difficult climate, freezing, hot, drought, whatever. You just got to do it. Even if you live in an apartment, just plop some seeds and start a container garden. But yeah, it's critical. It's one of those things for sovereign people that we ought to have a foothold on.
Yeah, definitely expect failure the first go around, but I mean that's where you learn from. I think I don't know. I had a good plot, but I'm in Florida and the soil here is just terrible. So
yeah, having good soil is really important. That's something too. The beauty of the Freedom Cell Network is it's like a learning organization where we do skill shares and individuals contribute knowledge, and that knowledge gets spread around the community. And as the individuals become more knowledgeable, so too does the network, right? So it's like a cell in a body. The more healthy the cell, the more healthy the whole. The more healthy the whole, the more healthy the cell.
Another tangent, not to go on too many of these, but the freedom cells. I've heard a lot, and I feel like I heard you bring it up before. And people always make the comparison that sounds a lot like terrorist cells or something. Was that intentional? Because I mean, I always thought that was kind of cool branding. I don't know. I'm curious. That's just a question from me. But
I don't know. We had a Houston Freedom Cell meetup. There's like 30 people, and I always tell this story because I like stories, and I honestly like to get a rise out of people and like see their reaction when I say stuff. But originally, I came up with I called it Freedom Cell to do a play, to be deliberately provocative for a play on Terror Cell. And some people are like, I think you guys should change the name. It sounds too much like Terror Cell. And I'm like, nyah, 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 nyah. But no, it's not. We're all peaceful. We're all about nonviolent resistance. Although, a lot of us do adopt to the strategy of fuck around and find out kind of deal. And at the end of the day, it doesn't serve anyone to just passively lay down and get taken out. Mm-hmm. But that being said, we're all subscribing to the non-aggression principle. That's one of the key foundational ethics. But, as again, deliberately provocative thing to kind of have people like, whoa, that's kind of hardcore. That's what the name came from. However, people quickly were like, yeah, it's like a cell in the body. And I think that's a little bit more appropriate. And there's a lot of good analogies that you can riff on, a lot of good symbolism with the cell.
Yeah, there's a lot to work with there. Yeah, many cells to a body kind of deal. Yeah, I know. For example, I did when we first started promoting what we're doing. I wrote a paper just to kind of like throw it out there and just kind of like make an appeal for what we're doing. And I went with the case for collectives because I just knew that was going to irk every individualist. Yeah. But it worked. A lot of people, obviously started arguments in many groups and like, oh my God, we're not collectivists. And it's like, well, I mean, maybe read the paper before you freak out. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people get caught up in that whole like individual or collective mindset anyways. I mean, that's kind of like, I guess it's probably a function of like Ayn Rand and stuff that comes from that line of thinking. And it's like, I do think the individual is prime, but I mean, you kind of get where I'm going at. All right, I'll get back into the questions.
We like to say collective action for the benefit of the individual.
Yes, exactly. It's like I've been reading up a lot on egoism lately, and it's kind of like same idea. It's kind of like you start from the ego the first, and you kind of branch out from there. And it's like his whole idea is a union of egoists, and it's the same idea. It's like, I mean, as long as you maintain your individuality while being a collective, there's no problem. So
yeah.
All right. This guy says libertarians have a lot of trouble talking about actual path towards liberty. They usually say step 1 is stick to our principles, and step 3 is minarchy/anarchy, like the end goal. Step 2 is just question marks. What do you think step 2 is, and how have freedom cells helped address step 2 so far? I mean, I know we kind of addressed that, but I don't know if you want to go into that one.
No, that's a great question. Yeah. And that's what I like to focus on and involve myself in. I've been a libertarian. I mean, I guess I've been a libertarian all my life. I was even rebel in high school, but since 2007, when I learned about libertarianism in large part from the Ron Paul campaign. But the politics never satisfied me because I saw it as a dead end from getting here to there. And so I started formulating and strategizing, envisioning what would a path from here to there, from state of society to a free society look like. And the New Libertarian Manifesto actually spends a lot of time talking about this with the phases of agorist societies. And Samuel Konkin said the consistent application of the philosophy of liberty is what brings about the free society. And so I think having this revolutionary agorist cadre that we have with the Freedom Cell Network, it's a great tool and vehicle that will help us to get from here to there. And so what I envision is utilizing strength in numbers in order to eventually opt out in mass. Opt out in a grand way, as in 100,000 people simultaneously declaring independence from the United States of America and the state governments and the local governments and the county. But in the meantime, also building alternatives, building defensive infrastructure, building our own communities, our own intentional communities. So we've essentially de facto opted out in large part, but then there'll be some little nuances like property tax or income tax, so on and so forth. Income tax is probably easier to avoid than property tax. And so the way that I envision it is I don't think wholeheartedly that libertarians will ever be able to eliminate the state. I think that I'm not a smash the state kind of guy or overthrow the government in the least bit. I think that's a failed strategy, especially if you need to use force against force, because we're really badly outgunned. Although there's more citizens, in air quotes, that have firearms than there are law enforcement and stuff, but they're all trained and ready to throw down and organized and have all these microwave weapons and drones and stuff. But we need to figure out a way to navigate our world where the statists can continue to exist and we can still exist within the same geographic area or political jurisdiction, but not be opted into their paradigm. And so I think one great compromise could be, we're going to continue to exist. We're going to continue to do our business over here. We're going to be good people, upstanding people in the area. We're going to contribute to society. But we are no longer going to participate in those institutions, those regulations, those welfare programs that we find unethical or have no use for. So, for example, we don't want to fund the Health and Human Services or the local police. We have our own security force. We're all armed. We know how to do self-defense. We don't want to pay for the wars, of course. But because we still travel on Her Majesty's roads, then perhaps we'll continue to pay the gas tax or some sort of use fee. Or we still go to the national park occasionally or the state park or whatever. So we'll pay as we go. I think that could be a great compromise, like starting to create some competition in governance. There's going to be blockchain-based technologies and there's going to be other service providers as the state continues to fail. And so I think there could be this middle ground where you can choose which services, which companies or which institutions or entities you want to provide a given service. And as the Freedom Cell Network, as we grow, I'd like us to take a more professional approach to building out these services. So the service of justice and arbitration, for example, if there's an internal dispute, we can already have a pre-existing arbitration channel, whether it's like a council of elders or a company that you hire and you work with. So I think there's a lot of value in that approach. I'd like to see our numbers grow to the point where we have 20,000 people in a county or a state, or 50,000 in a state, 100,000 in a state. And our network can choose an ambassador of sorts that goes to speak to the state representatives on behalf of the Freedom Cell Network. And it's a conversation like, hey, we have 100,000 people that are good people. They're contributing to society. They no longer want to participate in A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, and P. Maybe Q, R, S, and T. I don't know, though. I don't know how this conversation goes. So we want to figure out a peaceful transition because these people are done, essentially. They're going to take care of themselves. They're not going to be using the public education system. They're not going to be using law enforcement. They don't intend to dial 911. So we need to get some sort of either rebate on this, or, a lot of them don't want to pay property tax at all. And then the conversation's like, what does this transition towards sovereignty look like? And then, like, also what Samuel Edward Konkin talks about is having a private agorist security force. So as the network grows, and there's this awesome manner of decision making and communication that can take place within the network that's consensus based and decentralized and doesn't have a need for bureaucracy. But eventually, so imagine you have 20,000 people or 50,000 people, and you can put it to a decision like, hey, who wants to contribute $200 a month, $400 a month, whatever, to hire a private security force that's going to protect us from private criminals and public criminals alike. And so I think that's one way that we can slowly inch from here to there. On another note, there is a conspiracy right now to create a global technocratic totalitarian government that basically tracks, trace, and controls every aspect of human life. They're leveraging sustainability and social equity as values in order to bring this about. This is already being rolled out, and the foundation has been being built for quite some time, and it's accelerated with COVID. And the World Economic Forum has this concept called the Great Reset, which is essentially a marketing campaign for that technocracy. And so I believe that these technocrats and oligarchs, and again, it's ironic that they're like really trying to help the little guy, but they're multi-billionaires, and the Rockefellers, for example, that don't care about the little guy. But I believe that they're ultimately going to be successful in creating their smart cities with 5G technology that literally tracks, traces, and controls everything, social credit scores. They can flip off your ability to do trade and commerce, which is precisely why the Freedom Cell Network has so much value in a defensive posture, so we can not be shut out of commerce and trade and fulfilling our wants and needs with our fellow human beings. That's a defensive posture. There's also a proactive benefit from the Freedom Cell Network, because this is a better way for human beings to live that's more in line with their nature as free people. But I project that these smart cities are going to be successful. So we are going to need to carve out our spaces all across the globe outside of the city's jurisdiction so we can do our own thing. There's even this propaganda piece by the World Economic Forum. Let me read it to you real quick. It's really good. And I think it kind of sets the tone.
2030 thing, yeah.
Yeah, they talk about outside of the city. And I think it kind of sets the tone as far as strategy goes on what we ought to be focused on building for ourselves. So it's this, they have a whole series of articles that get published in mainstream stuff, and then they have it on their blog. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. And this was from 2016. They've been pushing this Great Reset stuff for a while, and then they just accelerated. So there's a section on this little essay. They live different kinds of lives outside of the city. My biggest concern is all the people who do not live in our city, those we lost on the way, those who decided that became too much, all this technology, those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and AI took over big parts of our jobs, those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. They live different kinds of lives outside of the city. Some have formed little self-supplying communities. Others just stayed in the empty and abandoned houses in small 19th century villages. So they try to paint it like we'll be living in shacks and like we'll be in shambles, living this weird life outside of the wall, outside of the smart city. But I want to position it to where we also are living in futuristic free cities with eco technology and eco development, right? But we're
funny because it's like we're describing the same thing, but they're describing it from a negative perspective kind of deal. So
theirs is about control. Ours is about freedom. That's fine. Yeah. I was going on a long rant, but that's what I project. So I think it's really important for us to understand the mechanisms of control and tyranny that are in place in this Great Reset, fourth industrial revolution, which is the merging of technology and humanity, like transhumanism. That's where things are going. And so we need to understand how we can navigate that while still maintaining our sovereignty and our humanity. And I think it's going to take place on the outside of the city.
Yeah, there's so much there to work with. Like it's like I just like that, all that. Like it's so interesting. For example, like I was just thinking while you were saying it, this is almost like a replay of history. Like I can't remember his name. It's going to drive me nuts. But I know there's a famous anarchist historian. He was in Pete Quinones' documentary, and I read one of his books. And one of his main points that he went into is that like the state, this was like a thing before where like the people in like the valleys and stuff like that, like that's kind of where the statists live. But there were people that were like in the hilltops and stuff that were like, they formed their own communities there. And they were like these anarchist communities that kind of got forgotten by history to some extent. And, you know, I don't know, there's a lot there and kind of almost, right. Forgotten, but it's like, because who keeps the history, you know? Mm-hmm. So, but it was just kind of cool. And he's actually going into, like, remember that book, how they actually thrived. And in many cases, they actually lived better lives than the people in the States.
Let me know when you remember that, because I want to look into that. Yeah. Was it a left anarchist, like more one of the early socialist anarchists, probably?
I think he's still alive. I know he was interviewed.
Oh, still alive. Okay.
Yeah. God. It's going to bug me. I'll send it to you later when I think of it, but I'm pretty sure he's one of those anarchists without hyphens kind of guys. I don't think he really prescribes to one side or the other.
It's Sheldon Richman?
No, it's not Richman. I know that for a fact. I'll have to send it to you. He's a historian. But yeah, and then also then like it's kind of like all this too is illustrating exactly what Konkin was talking about. Like literally what you're doing is like what Konkin was talking about and how that agora will move, and it's kind of like a perfect demonstration. And on top of that, we have, you know, like you brought up, the oligarchs, and I feel like the harder they push, the more we push back, kind of deal. And now we're getting to this point where I feel like it's like super obvious. And with that, like things like what you're doing and what I'm doing are kind of like growing, you know, exponentially. So it's like the more they push it, the harder we push back, kind of deal. You're just naturally, yeah. And then also I kind of wanted to go into a little bit how, like you had mentioned revolution at one point, and I always thought it was cool that Konkin did mention that at one point there will be like this ultimate agoric revolution, but it's not the revolution in the way that, you know, most people think of it. And I always thought that was kind of cool. It's like perfectly illustrated in Alongside Night, you know, kind of an example of that. And it's kind of funny. All you were talking about here, literally you sound like, you know, exactly like kind of like what was going on in Alongside Night. Yeah, there's just so much going on there. Just like the more you read, the more you pick up on different stuff. You're like, this is like this and this is like that.
Yeah.
You know,
Realities. So, truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah. I don't know. So that's cool. Go ahead, and we're getting close to the end of time, and I got to go get the kiddos here soon. I'll go ahead and go into my one of my other questions. What the heck? My question list went away. There we go. What do you find is the best ways to do outreach and building local communities? This guy said, my little local liberty group have all met through political action. So there's like kind of one thing of like developing, like how you develop groups away from the whole political action concept, because it's like one way it's a good mechanism for meeting. So.
Well, that's one way. You can always be like the weird voluntarist anarchist that goes to the political meetings. No shame in that. But I think it's really about kind of branching out and finding, there's a lot of people that are agorists or libertarians and they just don't know it. The ideas resonate with them and they just need someone to help introduce them to some of the rich history of literature, Murray Rothbard, Anatomy of the State, for example. But if you join the freedomcells.org website, I believe wherever the Telegram groups are linked, there's also a link to this Freedom Cell manual that I'm putting together. It's still a draft form, but it has some good advice on how to go recruit others and find other people. And so you'll want to, you know, brainstorm in your area. Are there homeschool meetups? Are there voluntarist meetups, which would be ideal? Some major cities have that. Are there gun clubs, prepper groups, gardeners, permaculture types? And so if you just go to meetups or you go to the local farmers markets and you just kind of strike up conversations, oftentimes when you're communicating with someone, they'll say some little keywords or they'll hint at things that they're into or frustrated with. And that creates an opportunity to share with them the message of liberty, alternatives, agorism, so to speak. So really it's about getting out of your comfort zone and just talking to as many people as possible. Hosting events as well. I think the folks in Tulsa are really leading by example, and they have a voluntarist meetup. So if people are struggling to meet people in their area, sometimes you just have to put out the banner, put out the light, like a lighthouse, and just voluntarist meetup first Thursday of every month, and then just put it out there. Doo, doo, doo. And the Remnant will be like, voluntarist. Oh, I heard about that. Or my brother was talking about that. Or I saw that YouTube video. I didn't know that there's people like that in this area. So I think that that's a good strategy as well, hosting an event. And at the event, you know, it could just be a social meetup where you just hang out, drink some beers, or at a coffee shop. Or you could find a speaker, or you could Zoom in a speaker that talks about philosophy, talks about action, strategy, so on and so forth. And so you have a 2-hour event, 45-minute speaker, 30-minute speaker, 30 minutes question, the rest of the hours for networking and organizing. I think that's a valuable way to do it. And then, of course, on the Freedom Cells website, we have a member map. So if you live in a densely populated area, chances are there's some folks that are already putting their hand up and indicating that they want to meet other like-minded people.
No, that's some good ones. I never thought about the Zoom someone in. Because we were, you know, I said I brought up we're doing the chapters thing. We've already had a couple chapters do a couple meetups. They're mostly just social stuff. Like here in Florida, we did just a beers and burger type thing. But that's a really good idea, having someone Zoom in and kind of just doing like that thing to add to it. But yeah, with that, I think we're probably going to go ahead and bring this to a close. I've had a good conversation. I'm going to go ahead and give you a chance to drop your plugs. Yeah, I mean, we'll put them in the video description as well. So also, before you go into that, stick around after the broadcast because I just want to ask you one quick question and then let you go if you don't mind.
Sure.
So yeah, but if you want to go ahead and drop your plugs, I mean, obviously Freedom Cells, but give you a chance. You got a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Yeah, I got 3 things that I like to promote right now, and then other than that, I'm hanging out with my girlfriend and my kids. But that my life centers around these 3 things right now. One of them is Freedom Cells. You can go to freedomcells.org. Cells as in cell in the body. The other is Kratom. That's my business and my bread and butter. So Kratom helps people with stress, anxiety, taking the edge off. Then there's red varieties that help with pain, relaxation. Most people take them instead of prescription pain medicine. And then the white variety.
I don't want to cut you off, but I have something to add to it. I actually meant to go into it. I actually, decades ago, or not decade, but like a decade ago, I used to actually be addicted to pills at one point. So I've been down that road. I didn't have Kratom at the time, but I've used it before, and I can tell from my memories of how opiates were and stuff that it would have been a very helpful tool to have around at the time, because that was something I've struggled with at one point. I don't anymore, but just something, just kind of like a personal testimony that I think Kratom's like a really great tool for people that are going through those kind of problems. So go ahead. Sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off.
A lot of people are struggling and opioids, and also like a lot of people take Adderall, which is just essentially like legalized chemical meth. And then people drink a lot and they want to drink less. So Kratom helps in all those different circumstances. But the white types, they're good for energy, anxiety, motivation. And so if people want to give it a try for free, all you got to do is pay $5 for shipping. It's freeounceofkratom.com, freeounceofkratom.com. And then finally, I do a podcast called Live Free Now, and you can find it at livefreenow.show. Try to put out 2 to 3 episodes a week, and I share a lot of the ideas that I've been talking about on this interview.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. Like I said, I follow it. So I'll go ahead and do my plugs real quick. It'll all be in the description as well. We're doing, with everything going on with the Zuck stuff, we're trying to collect emails. So, shoot me an email over at thelibertymovementglobal@gmail.com, or you can, if you're in the group, you can send it to me, or you can send it to any of the admins, and we're collecting those right now. So I got the email. We're going to be working on a website here soon, probably a newsletter, so keep an eye out for that stuff. And then obviously we have the group. So if you'd like to get involved, we're going to probably here soon start like trying to branch off into other things to kind of get away from Facebook. Hopefully once all these status Olympics are done, maybe it'll cool down a little bit, because I'll be completely honest, we do not have our infrastructure together like we want to, because the idea was we were trying to get this together as quick as possible and get an infrastructure, and that way we can move off once we have a website, email list, all that stuff. But with the status Olympics, it kind of threw everything off, and Zuck turned it up. With that being said, obviously this is a glowing recommendation for Freedom Cells, because they don't have that issue. So I tell anyone who's doing what we're doing to do that as well. That I'll go ahead and call it a day. So deuces. It was nice having you, John. I really enjoyed it.
Peace. Thanks for having me.